Can Tetris help people quit drinking? What about PTSD? Today I'm going to explain to you the weird world of Tetris as a therapy from a drug scientist's perspective, who is also boiling maple syrup at this point, so sorry. The idea that Tetris can actually be used as a therapy kind of sounds like clickbait. And honestly, I would have been skeptical of it had I not seen Tetris used in like every form of neuroscience. So we see that when people play Tetris, it kind of gets stuck in their brain. So we see that they'll actually think about it more often in those like time periods between when you're awake and when you're falling asleep. But you also see it show up in dreams and in genuinely weird ways. So some of the original studies on this looked at people who had amnesia, and specifically what is known as anterograde amnesia. So this is amnesia where they can't remember new things. So they can't like form new memories. So Drew Barrymore in 50 First Dates, for example. So they made people with this type of amnesia basically play Tetris, and then people without amnesia play Tetris. And what they found was the people with amnesia would say that they've like never played this game before, but they would dream about it and they'd be able to remember, like recall their dreams of Tetris, but not the actual act of learning to play Tetris in the first place. And so this is the OG idea of the Tetris effect, that basically playing like repetitive things consistently can actually lead you to kind of get like stuck in that rhythm. Like musicians who like hear the same notes of a song that they're practicing over and over again when they're dreaming or right before they fall asleep. Or for like me, when I was playing a lot of Donkey Kong, that minecart level of just like skipping over things, that repetitive movement gets stuck in your brain. So since it shows up in people's brains pretty consistently, we can use it to study memory and like all sorts of effects. So scientists have actually looked at Tetris to see if like there's a difference between autistic people and people not on the spectrum in terms of like how much they like things to be kind of put in their place. So not memory, but like that actual process of moving things and then having those rows clear. But they did not actually see that autistic people and people not with the disorder actually differed in how much they enjoyed that like different pieces becoming part of the whole. And then people were like, okay, can we harness the power of Tetris for good then? Can we use this as a type of therapy? And one of the initial things that they looked at was actually PTSD, and here is why. So one of the major issues that people have with PTSD is they have these kind of like very vivid flashbacks. And vivid flashbacks are just basically like that specific imagery just kind of showing up again and again. Some cognitive neuroscientists were like, okay, but if PTSD flashbacks are like one of the major problems and all those are like visual imagery issues, could we affect that visual imagery somehow and kind of help decrease the likelihood of these flashbacks? And so their solution for that, unsurprisingly, Tetris. I actually use the term cognitive vaccine for this. They were basically saying that like you could stop people from creating PTSD by making them focus on something else that's using that same visual imagery. So what they did was a genuinely wild study. They basically took people who did not have PTSD, brought them into a room, and then had them watch a 12-minute traumatizing film. Like they took the most violent, gory images and put them into this film. And then they had them come back 30 minutes later, and they either played Tetris or did nothing. And they looked to see if the group that had played Tetris would have fewer flashbacks from this genuinely traumatizing film. How did this one get past the IRB, honestly? And fun fact, they chose 30 minutes because they claimed that this was the average waiting room time in an emergency room. So you'd only typically spend an average of 30 minutes at an ER. And so they said if you could play Tetris after this period of time, like you would be good. What ERs in the United States are they in? They do say that you have this 6-hour window. So even if you're spending 5 hours in the ER, which might be closer to reality, you still have a chance to prevent the PTSD from forming. And not only did it seem to help with things like the fake PTSD that they had created in people by traumatizing them, but it also seemed to help with people who are actually like combat veterans who came back with PTSD. And then they basically had them either do treatment with EMDR or treatment with EMDR plus Tetris. Yes, that was a proper control group here. And what they found was that if they had done Tetris for 1 hour along with EMDR, so 1 hour a day of Tetris, actually decreased the likelihood of flashbacks in comparison to the group that did not play Tetris but still had therapy. Now here's the thing, it seems to actually be decreasing the symptoms of PTSD, but not like cognitive effects in general. So it doesn't seem to like just help with your memory overall. It seems to be specific to some of the PTSD symptoms. And now science is moving more in the realm of can we use Tetris for things like drugs? So they've seen that like playing Tetris is linked to a decrease in things like food cravings, sex cravings, and drug cravings in general. And then they just recently did a study looking at this specifically in women who use alcohol problematically. Specifically, the study was looking at cravings because cravings are an incredibly important part of why people continue to use drugs. So it's either cravings that spark during the day that make you want like a drink when you get home, or it's cravings when you've quit that kind of lead you to relapse. So this study was looking at something called ecological momentary intervention, which is basically like you have a smartphone that can now provide you with real-time access to things like interventions from people. Hey, are you okay? Are you having a craving right now? Is there something you need help with? So in this study, they originally recruited women from health centers just by going in and asking about them. And then you can see like the despair in the writing of the scientists. They're like, we tried to do this multiple times and we got one participant successfully. So then we just kind of like plastered everything everywhere and we're like, somebody please come join our study. So they had 40 women overall who had problematic alcohol use. So their scores on like an alcohol use inventory were pretty high, suggesting that they drank a lot. They drank more than they wanted to. In general, they had some kind of criteria for addiction there. And so they paid them $261. Why that amount? And had them basically just check in at least once a day. They'd ask them like, how high is your craving? So they would just basically send them a text that's like, how much are you craving alcohol right now? And they were supposed to respond on a scale. And then if they got a certain level of response, so if their craving was high, it would basically prompt them to do things. And in this case, they would either prompt them to just play Tetris or like relax for 4 minutes and then check in about their craving 4 minutes later. Not a fan of that control group. But in this case, Tetris was not like the best therapy. So it did seem to help reduce cravings in women who were more likely to say that their alcohol use was harmful and also more likely to want to quit. But in women who did not seem to want to quit that much, it did nothing to their cravings. So Tetris might be good for things like PTSD, might not be a cure-all for everything, but it's pretty impressive for like a random computer game designed over 4 decades ago by a Russian scientist who was just bored and made it for funsies.